The Night Bulletin presents The Gallery, written and read by TF Ahmad. Gabe shuffled down Augusta Avenue on a hot July day, lazily slurping his watered-down iced coffee when he passed an art gallery. It was like the many private art galleries that dotted Chicago with its glass-fronted displays of peculiar paintings and descriptions of the artist's intent. Gabe almost passed it by without a second glance, but the 3 paintings on display in the window caught his eye. Each was a painting of a person's face, so close that their visage dominated the frame and left very little space for any background. Each portrait was done in a lifelike fashion, though they were not quite photorealistic. It was as if the artist had taken each person's likeness and painted them as a porcelain doll. The skin was too shiny, the eyes flat, the hair too silky. Each face had a different expression, but all were unsettling. One of the faces had a look of dismay, while another a look of pure terror. The last face looked resigned, and shiny streaks on this person's face were probably tears. Gabe took a loud sip of his coffee and entered the gallery, morbidly curious. Maybe he would meet the artist and ask about the meaning behind the portraits. He sure as hell would not buy one. He couldn't afford art on his meager wages. Gabe looked around the gallery. It was completely empty. "Hello?" called Gabe, shaking the ice in his plastic cup like it was a child's rattle. No one answered. He approached the paintings with a curious eye, but found that none of them had any plaques showing the name of the painting or any information about the artist. All there was under each painting was a small gold plaque with black lettering that said, "Please do not touch the artwork." Gabe became more unsettled as he walked around the gallery. The room was completely empty save for the portraits on the wall. Each portrait contained a porcelain face, its expression always one of sadness, sorrow, resignation, futility, or horror. There were no happy faces. Even stranger, there were empty canvases on the wall at random intervals between the portraits. Even these blank canvases each had a plaque that said, "Please do not touch the artwork," beneath them. "Hello?" Gabe called again, his voice echoing in the large room. No one answered. He circled the gallery a single time, noting not only the lack of identifying information, but also registering that no prices were displayed for the artwork. He placed his iced coffee down on the floor, the ice clinking softly. He approached a blank canvas, trying to see if he was missing anything important. He was overcome with the need to touch the canvas. He did not know where this compulsion came from, but before he knew it, his hand shot out and fell through the canvas. Gabe opened his mouth to scream, but no sound emerged. He tried to pull his hand out, but it sucked him forward like quicksand. He placed his foot on the wall and pulled with all of his might. He simply succeeded in dislocating his shoulder. He grunted with effort and pain, but it was soon over when his entire body was swallowed by the canvas. A soft light like distant headlights on a country road shone, and the final canvas was revealed. A man in a sharply tailored suit with short brown hair and a large beard opened a door that was hidden behind a seamless wall and entered the gallery. He approached the iced coffee cup that now held an inch of melted water at the bottom and picked it up. He carried it over to the trash can like it was a dead rat. He approached the canvas with Gabe's face and smiled. So the boy had shown defiance in his final glare. It did not matter what the paintings showed, only that they were completed in a timely manner. The man in the suit counted 36 complete canvases and 14 blank ones. Good. He would be done soon. After the last canvas was completed, he'd close the gallery and load all 50 paintings into the back of his van. He would then drive to a secret place where they would be collected. He would then shave his beard, move to a new city, and open a new gallery. The cycle would be complete. An Afternoon Interrupted, written and read by TF Ahmad. Roy was pretty sure he was sober when he walked into his living room and found a torso on his couch. He was nursing a hangover, but he didn't think hallucinations were possible when hungover. He rubbed his eyes and looked closer. It was indeed a torso. He could see the smooth white skin, the nipples, and the belly button. There was no blood, and where the limbs and head were supposed to be, there was only smooth, unbroken skin. Roy was flooded with a sudden feeling of unreality that threatened to overwhelm him, so he went into the kitchen and got a beer. He drank half of it in 2 gasping swallows and peeked back into the living room. Yep, the torso was still there. After finishing his beer and opening another, he went back into the living room and crept closer to the torso. He reached out and touched it. It sure felt like human skin, but it was probably just one of those dummies that they used in CPR classes, except without a head. Roy went into his bedroom and grabbed his phone. He had no text messages or missed calls. He went back into the living room. The torso had moved. It was no longer on the right side of the couch. It had somehow migrated to the left side. He could still see the impression on the cushion that the torso had occupied previously. Roy opened his camera app and snapped a photo of the torso, sending it to his best friend June. "What the fuck is this?" he wrote in a text message. June called him immediately. "What the fuck is that?" June said. "That's what I want to know," Roy said. "It looks like a mannequin." "It definitely feels real." "You touched it?" "Well, yeah." "How did it get there?" Roy sighed. "I was hoping you could tell me that. Maybe somebody broke one of those CPR dummies and decided to dump the evidence in your apartment. Seems odd to dispose of evidence from one crime by breaking and entering another apartment." "I don't know," June said. "You do live in a pretty sketch neighborhood." "My neighborhood's not sketch." There was a silence on the line. "Come to the park," June said. "Kate and I are hanging out there." Roy looked at the torso. "Okay," he answered. "I'll be there soon." Roy grabbed his keys, wallet, and bicycle helmet and walked out of his apartment, pointedly not looking at his couch. He went down the front stairs to his bike, but it was not where he'd parked it last night. He circled his building, looking at every conceivable spot where a bike could be locked up. He found nothing. He was furious. First the torso, and now this? He threw his helmet into the bushes and began marching towards the park on foot. When he was halfway down his block, he stopped in his tracks. Coming towards him was his bike. At first, it seemed to be riding on its own, but with a second look, Roy realized a pair of legs was riding his bicycle. The legs were smooth and white. There were dirty white slip-ons on the feet, and the tops of the legs were connected to the coccyx. Like with the torso, there was only smooth skin where the rest of the body would be. The bike rode straight and true, despite there being no hands to guide the handlebars. Roy took off running after his bike. It was instinct. The bike rounded a corner and he lost it. Dejected, he walked back to his apartment, suddenly tired. When he approached the front steps, he found his bike lying in the bushes by where he'd tossed his helmet. He bolted up the stairs and into his apartment, not bothering to lock up his bike. Inside, Roy found the torso still on the couch, only this time with the legs attached. The armless, headless body remained still on the couch with the right leg propped on the left knee like it was relaxing. Roy said nothing. He went into the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of whiskey, and poured himself half a glass. He took both his drink and the bottle with him. He grabbed a chair from the dining room and dragged it into the living room. He sat in the chair at what he hoped was a safe distance from the torso with legs. He took a deep swallow of his whiskey, letting the burn consume his body. "So," Roy said, feeling stupid, "where did you come from?" The torso remained silent. Roy finished his whiskey and poured himself another. His thoughts were interrupted by his phone vibrating in his pocket. It was June. "Dude, where are you?" June asked. "I'm still at my apartment." "Why? What happened?" "The torso is still here," Roy said. "Only now it has legs." "What? How?" Roy did not feel like explaining. "Just come over. And bring Kate." He hung up. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. "Wait here," Roy told the torso. It still did not answer. June's lanky frame walked into the apartment, a shorter brunette following him. The sight of his friends filled Roy with such inexplicable relief that he felt tears prick the corners of his eyes. He held them back, however, and ushered his friends into the living room. "Well, I'll be fucked," June said, staring at the unmoving torso with legs on the couch. "You weren't kidding," Kate said. She grabbed the bottle of whiskey off the floor near Roy's chair and took a swig. She grimaced and handed the bottle to June, who also took a pull without moving his eyes from the bizarre sight on the couch. In the silence that followed, no one spoke. They passed the bottle of whiskey back and forth until all of them were drunk. The torso seemed to be easier to deal with whilst inebriated. "What do we do?" Roy asked, desperation tinging his drunken slur. I have no idea," Kate said, belching. "We should call the police," June said. Roy's eyes immediately darted to the bong in the corner of the living room. The apartment reeked of weed. "Okay, bad idea," June said. This conversation seemed to exhaust the entirety of their brain power. They again stood in silence. Kate retreated to the kitchen to grab beer. She handed one to each of her friends as well. Between sips, Roy felt his anger grow. What the hell was this thing doing in his apartment? Who had put it there? What kind of sick joke was this? He balled his free hand into a tight fist and approached the torso. Kate and June looked up with twin faces of apprehension. "What the hell are you?" Roy screamed, shaking his fist at the torso. "What are you doing in my apartment?" The torso did not respond. Roy drew his fist back to strike the stomach when a voice spoke behind him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." All three of the friends turned and saw a man standing in the doorway leading to the front hall. He wore a trench coat and a trilby despite the heat outside. His face was hidden by the brim of his hat, but Roy could see a thin trickle of smoke from a cigarette dancing in the air. The man looked straight out of a Dashiell Hammett novel. Kate broke the silence. "Why shouldn't Roy hit it? It's just a stupid mannequin." The man looked up at the trio. He looked exactly like an old Hollywood star straight out of Central Casting. He puffed on his cigarette and pulled it from his lips. "That's not a mannequin," he said, pointing with his cigarette. "If you attack it, it will respond in kind." Roy stepped away from the torso and rejoined his friends. They stood like chastised children who had been caught stealing. "Who are you?" Roy asked. "And what are you doing in my apartment?" The man smiled and stepped forward. "I'm Don Fernando Perez, private paranormal investigator." He bowed and reached for Kate's hand in order to kiss it. She slapped his hand away. "You don't look Latino," June said. The man scrunched his brow. "And you don't look Korean." Now June scrunched his brow. "I'm half German." "So am I," Perez said. "What the fuck is that thing?" Roy asked with frustration. "And did you say paranormal investigator?" "Yes," Perez said, taking his eyes off June. "And that's a torso." "I know that," Roy said, "but what's it doing in my apartment?" "Hiding," Perez said. "Hiding?" Kate said. "Yes," Perez said. His previous cigarette had disappeared at some point, and he was lighting another. "That torso," the investigator said, blowing smoke, "is the grim result of a discorporation spell gone awry. I assume you know what that means?" The trio shook their heads in unison. Perez rolled his eyes. "A discorporation spell is when... Never mind. I don't have to explain anything to you. The only thing you need to know is that those legs are wanted for murder." June and Kate stared back at the detective with blank expressions. Never had they heard such a ridiculous statement. Roy, however, had a different expression on his face. "How did the torso murder someone?" he asked. "By stomping them to death," Perez said. Roy swallowed, realizing those stains on the legs' shoes were not dirt. Perez languidly smoked his cigarette and stared at the torso. "Yes," he said. "We found a man bleeding profusely in Humboldt Park by Division Street earlier this morning. He was able to give a description of his assailant to police. Thankfully, the responding officer knew to radio me. We have been chasing this rogue torso all over the city since last night. Unfortunately, the man expired en route to the hospital." "How did you find it here?" Kate asked. "We just followed the legs here. I saw them enter your apartment and had my men go get backup. They're taking a hell of a time getting here." He looked at his watch. As if on cue, a group of 3 men dressed exactly like Perez entered the apartment with a clatter of polished Oxfords on hardwood. One of the men pulled what looked like a ray gun from Buck Rogers from his belt and pointed it at the torso. The other 2 men held a giant metal box between them. They put the box on the ground, and one of them punched a code on a keypad on the side of the box. The box hissed open to reveal a spacious, padded interior. The 2 men then dove for the torso, one of them wrapping his arms around the chest while the other wrapped his arms around the legs. The torso began thrashing violently, knocking the coffee table askew and overturning a chair. A glass broke somewhere. Kate screamed. June stared blankly. Roy began to cackle with insane laughter. The men dragged the shambling torso towards the box and wrestled it inside. The man with the ray gun reached forward and punched the code into the keypad again, and the box closed with a hiss. The box continued to rattle for a few seconds before one of the men pressed a button. Another, sharper hiss could be heard, and the box went still. "Is it dead?" June asked. Perez shook his head. "Just tranquilized. We'll take it into custody." "What happened with the rest of the body?" Kate asked. Kate, Roy thought, ever the inquisitive mind. "We already have it in custody," the paranormal investigator said. "We just needed to tie up this loose end. Can't have a torso loose in the city." With that, the gaggle of Humphrey Bogart wannabes exited the apartment with their prisoner in tow. Perez turned before going, lighting yet another cigarette. "Before I forget," he said, and reached into his inner coat pocket. He pulled out 3 thick envelopes and handed one to each of the 3 confused people staring back at him. Roy opened the envelope and found a large stack of $100 bills. He gaped. $10,000 each, to forget you ever saw this?" Perez asked. "I think I can deal with that," June said, folding the money and placing it in his back pocket. "I'll deal," Kate said. Roy simply nodded in disbelief. "Very well then," the investigator said, and with a tip of his hat, Don Fernando Perez was gone out of their lives forever. Roy looked around, the disturbed furniture the only evidence that anything strange occurred in the apartment. "You guys want to get a drink?" he asked. With nods all around, the 3 headed to California Clipper, their favorite bar in all of Chicago. That was The Gallery and An Afternoon Interrupted. Please rate, review, subscribe, and tell a friend about this podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Night Bulletin.